Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. It is good to be with you this Saturday morning or afternoon or evening if you're in another part of the world. Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. It's been one that we tried to have, and then of course Kali had some illness in his family that he had to take care of, and so we rescheduled. But really grateful for the work that we'll be discussing, as well as grateful for you all taking the time to say good morning to folks that are already here in the chat. Remind people to take a minute. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you do not already, support us on Patreon if you do not already, and support Cooperation Jackson also, and make sure to share the video. Get this. You could share it right now, let people know that we are live having this conversation this morning, but also share it with your friends, people that you want to organize with, family members, whoever you think it'll be useful for, in your organizing and in your local discussions. And I'm hopeful I'm hopeful that it is right, because I think for folks who watch our channel and other outlets like Black Liberation Media, a lot of times we understand the criticism of the Democratic Party, and we're not aligned with the Democratic Party. But then there's a question of what are we going to do, right? What are we going to do, knowing that? And so that's the discussion that we're really going to have today. And so, anyways, I'm looking forward to it. As everybody here, I'm sure knows, Kali Akuno has been organizing for decades now. The book that's over my shoulder here, I really recommend it. Also, I know we'll talk a little bit about where can people get guidance and things like that. But Jackson Rising is a second edition of it, basically, that came out through PM Press. That's it's thick. It's thick, but it's full of essays, right? So it's short pieces that you can read about specific topics or areas of their work and analysis, by multiple different authors. I highly recommend it. So let me do a quick introduction. Kali Akuno is a co-founder and co-director of Cooperation Jackson. He was the director of special projects and external funding in the mayoral administration of the late Chokwe Lumumba in Jackson, Mississippi. His focus in his role was supporting cooperative development, the introduction of eco-friendly and carbon reduction methods of operation, and the promotion of human rights and international relations for the city. Akuno has also served as the co-director of the U.S. Human Rights Network and the executive director of People's Hurricane Relief Fund. I'm sure we'll talk about Katrina a little bit in this conversation, based in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. He was the co-founder of the School of Social Justice and Community Development, a public school serving academic needs of low-income African American and Latino communities in Oakland. There's a previous interview that I also linked in the show notes that we had a couple years ago with Kali, along with Kamal Franklin from Community Movement Builders. And I encourage people to check out that, as well as read the pieces, the Navigating the Storm pieces. They lay out a lot of what we're discussing. So without further ado, Kali Akuno, welcome back to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. It's good to be with you.
Good to be here. I'm glad we could reschedule.
Yeah, me too. Really appreciate it. So I kind of want to start actually with talking a little bit about the Popular Front strategy, because this is the thing that is, I think we're still hearing a lot, and people don't, it's kind of just taken, I think, as dogma in certain ways on the left, that we have to vote Democrat in order to stop the right, that this is the strategy. And you're not, as I understand it, you're not actually, I won't even characterize your position there. Let's just start there, and why the need for other thinking around this, in your opinion, at this time.
Well, let's speak plainly. That strategy is just leading us further and further down the path to fascism. However you define that, and we know there's some definition of struggle over that, and there should be. My position is that fascism is here and has been here for a minute, and that some of the confusion around that is not understanding that fascism really is just a form of capitalist rule. And capitalism has many different forms, and they can operate concurrently, right? So you can have, and we've had. So I'm not talking about something that we haven't experienced, in the span of many of our lifetimes. So you can have, a social democratic regime, say in parts of Europe or Canada, and in the global context that exists right next to some, fascist dictatorship in Latin America. And those countries can support each other. They can treat with each other. So, put it in the global context and put it in the framework of what capitalism and imperialism actually are in the concrete. Okay. So this kind of practice, this popular front practice, I would argue that it is nowhere that it has been applied since the 1930s that has actually stopped any society from moving further to the right. If there is one, I'd like to study it and to get some detailed kind of analysis of what did the actual revolutionary forces do in that context to stop the halt of fascism, right, or the lurch further to the right towards a deeper type of authoritarianism. And to be clear, so folks who may not be fully aware with this kind of terminology and some of the history, even the term comes out of the Communist International, the common term, and it was for those, sorry to do a little history and this be reducted, but after the Bolshevik Revolution, there was a general thought amongst at least a number of communists throughout the world that there was going to be a revolutionary tide, that working and oppressed people were going to kind of, overthrow the bourgeoisie and defeat capitalism. And, people thought that, not in speculative terms, I want folks to be clear, because there was some attempt at revolutionary transformation in Germany at the same time. In Hungary, there was a short-lived Soviet, that experiment that existed there, and there were many others. Just to cite those, which are probably the most, documented, at least in the English language, that folks can go look up for yourself. And so there was this notion that, hey, we on the move. We're going to be able to coordinate. We're going to be able to kind of rationalize, socialize a production on a global scale, meet people's needs. And within basically a 4-year period, that was very clear that that's not happening. That's not what's going on. There was still some opportunity on the horizon, but the immediate kind of defeat of capitalism was not in the cards. So that led to what's called the second phase, right, which was a broad sense of kind of united fronts as some of the reactionary forces regroup, rebound, allied with each other after this happened in the context of World War I, the first great inter-imperialist war. And so as they kind of, the capitalists got their act together, got regrounded, started settling new terms, new balances of trade, new credit, kind of relationships and deals. And in the UK started to give more way to the ascendancy of the United States, particularly on the basis of the United States being at that time the greatest creditor nation, on the planet, but also its overall productive capacity started to far outstrip what was going on in Europe. It started that's where the U.S. hegemonic role really started to kind of fully develop, emerge, and mature. And they supported each other to the hilt, like the United States aiding in the invasion of the Soviet Union, along with almost every other imperialist power that there was for a brief period of time. And then that United Front period then gave way to what's called the second period, gave way to the third period. The third period, this is like 1928. Folks kind of thought, within the Comintern, again, we're talking specifically about their particular analysis. Folks thought that there was some more revolutionary opportunities and that they needed to break with basically the reformists and adopt a more hard line. And that's the period where more the term kind of it was around a little bit before, but it's kind of extensive use of describing, social democrats as social imperialists because of their support of colonization, particularly in Africa and Asia, and kind of compromising with their bourgeoisies in order to kind of make some things a little bit better in their own countries. At the expense of others. And I'm bringing that up because this is going to come back, right? In terms of concrete practice and some of the arguments we are hearing and living through right now, not things of the past, and then when Mussolini and the fascist party emerged in Italy, and then, that was followed up by the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, coming into power democratically, I might add, so-called democratically in the bourgeois democratic, practice. In 33, it became very clear that's not going to work. So there was kind of an abandonment in principle, by like 38, as war in Europe started to advance, starting first and foremost, in Europe anyway, in Spain, right? Some history folks should go look at. But in Asia, that already started earlier, with the Japanese invading Korea, Manchuria, and then eventually China, to put it in a global context. And so there was a major adjustment, and this adjustment was the Popular Front. And the Popular Front said, we need to rejoin efforts, with the reformers, with the revisionists, i.e. the Social Democrats, the socialists. And further, we need to ally with anybody who's willing to defend bourgeois democracy and a cross-class alliance. So much so, we need to support our own party's platform interests and organizing initiatives to not break or to not threaten any aspect of the coalition with these forces, because defeating fascism is the primary cause. And what does that do? And what has it done since then? It has made the actual aim and push for revolution somewhere in the distant horizon, that to this point will never come, has never come, never really been aspired to, right? And what we have gotten, you've gotten, out of that, people would argue, well, we got social democracy after World War II. Social democracy is just another form of capitalist rule. Do not get it twisted, right? And as long as under those terms, as long as the capitalist class, the international bourgeoisie, and all its fractions, as long as they could ensure an amenable right to return, right, basically by 4% every year, they could go with distributing, some crumbs, to workers in certain specified areas. And in these, let's be clear where that was. That was in Western Europe and North America. And to a lesser degree, like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and then other places that wind up being, under the direct imperial orbit of the United States, where they concentrated some development, to kind of particularly contain China and the Soviet Union. So that winds up getting you places like South Korea, winds up getting you places like Taiwan, but those places are limited, at best. And so and then it's based upon a trade-off that you hear, all the time, like, kind of the creature comforts that come with living in the core of the empire. There's enough spillage so that folks could have, it started with, basic stuff, and I'm not just joking, but it started with, like, you can have a washing machine, you can have electricity in your house, then you can get a TV, You can get a second car. You know, you might get a month vacation if you're in Europe, or a 2-week vacation, you know, if you're in the United States. Meanwhile, this is premised on the cold, calculated exploitation and extraction from the third world, or what many people now call the global South. Like, that is what that is mediated upon. And then a regimented system of production and hierarchy within the core empire itself, right? You know, so where Black folks fit in Europe, right, or where the Irish fit in, say like in the UK during this period, or you know where Arabs fit in France, you know, in different places. We can go on and on. You know, each country having a slightly different population that it did a level of super exploitation around. But this general orientation, right, is largely, you know, let's speak. I would argue, I love to argue with folks, but this Popular Front kind of orientation is largely one drawn by petty bourgeois forces who don't want to lose their status and don't want to lose their comforts and aren't in principle solidarity with other folks. That's the reality. And what that then enables is a set of compromises to keep comforts, but politically, ideologically, the forces of the right continue to regalvanize, reorganize, and gain strength and define the terms, the political terms by which social policy winds up being constructed. And that social policy basically mediates all the relations of production that exists and reproduction that exists in society. And you can see that in practice. You know, I'm in my 50s, and I've heard literally since Reagan, you know, or I'm old enough and conscious enough to remember, like, this is the worst it's ever going to be. You know, we got to do all this to you know, we got to unite, we got to come together with these liberals and these reformers, you know, to stop this man getting in office and to stop this further lurch to the right. Ronald Reagan would be astonished at where the United States is policy-wise now, right? He would be
absolutely
of like, well, you know, y'all don't move further to the right, and we now define positions that are to the right of Ronald Reagan's in that area of the conservative party, you know, the Republican Party. Those are now standard Democratic Party positions. Standard Democratic Party positions that many of our forces are now touting as something that we kind of have to support in order to protect some of these rights, right? And so, you know, with the Popular Front politics, you got to always ask yourself who's being sacrificed, because that's what it basically boils down to, right? And if we're going to really, you know, espouse for a broad liberatory practice, then we got to figure out in some way, somehow, to not throw anybody under the bus. You know, and that means making some hard choices, you know, given the limited number of resources that we have. But it then means you have to do a different type of organizing, you know, to try to, you know, both meet folks' needs and to fight, you know, and I mean that word, you know, intentionally, to fight for everything, you know, and not just assume certain things are going to be granted on the basis of privileges and rights, you know, in a bourgeois framework, because they fundamentally don't exist. They exist only at a point of compromise as to how much power different social forces in each society can wield, right? Force decides. Let's be clear. In the capitalist world, force at the end of the day is what determines the actual concrete terms of the relationship, not some bourgeois abstract rights.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think it's sound analysis, and I agree. And I think probably the next place we should go in this discussion is just to talk a little bit. I encourage people to please read the pieces that you've already written on the Navigating the Storm blog that kind of lay all this out. But for folks in this conversation that, you know, haven't engaged that work yet, Could you just talk a little bit up front, before we get into some of the scenarios and stuff that we do want to talk about, but of, what are you advocating then as a kind of organizing approach, and how is that approach, kind of evolving as you've been thinking about it? Because to be clear for folks who don't know, you started to really vocalize this, and think about it strategically probably longer ago than that, but you started to at least publicly articulate it in like 2021, at least, thinking about, in terms of the fact that the right in part thinking that Trump was going to be elected, which he still could be, and we'll get into some of that. But just thinking about the forces of the right and what they are doing, and then where we need to position ourselves. And so maybe just talk a little bit about that organizing approach and kind of what you're thinking in terms of like the building blocks of it, what people can do.
Yeah. How to ground this. I've been arguing this for well over a decade, and I think you said probably the clearest kind of exposition with some of the stuff that came out. But there's another piece I wrote about a decade ago called "Until We Win." So I would reference folks, to check that piece out. It winds up being one of the earlier kind of articulations of what we've been kind of tout collectively in some practice within Cooperation Jackson, with some things I've been putting out, like this kind of like a building fight formula. And it's, in many respects, what this is saying, number one, we live in an era where we are deeply disorganized. And we got to start from that premise. We do not have the forms of political organization or social organization galvanized around self-defense, autonomous production, and political organization that we had, even 50, 60 years ago. And I'm not just talking about, for those of a more anarchist leaning, I'm not just talking about the political parties. I'm talking about the types of collectives, even anarchists had, in earlier eras, and what it means to be organized, and what type of commitments and disciplines and obligations that folks had on a kind of social agreement basis with each other. To make the volunteer labor that we were all giving of ourselves to make social and collective activities happen. Like we were at a different stage then. So you have to start with this premise of, I'm working with folks who may be volunteering, doing, some gardening, food production, at a small scale, who may be doing some work, supporting prisoners, who may be doing some work, doing after school activities, with children, defending queer folks, particularly young queer folks, in this very disjointed way. And, large parts of it nowadays being dominated by NGOs, by nonprofits, and folks kind of scrambling for resources, from philanthropic capital, right? That particular wing of capital, which is not only seeking a tax write-off, but to influence, social policy and orientation within kind of respectable limits and bounds. So that's we're putting band-aids on. So let's how do we start with folks? I'm not going to condemn you for that. All that work is, that's not the point. All that work is necessary, but we have to realize that it exists because of the success of how capital has been able to at least in the United States, I'll speak more clearly in other forces that has some level of social democracy or a welfare state, which is what more folks in the United States know their term to be, because it is fragmented at, and where, for a short period of time, these kind of social services were being funded and mediated by the government. They've now been more privatized, right? As capital has set it up, that y'all not gonna get no pennies from me. You're not extracting anything, other than a few, tax write-offs here and there, which is where the philanthropic side of it comes in, and they can cut that. So the difference there is that, capital can cut. They can decide, I'm gonna fund you this year to do your program, or I'm not. Whereas in the welfare state, that was a structure mediated thing that was paid for by taxes, right? So you knew there was going to be a level of consistency in funding there, like say in the 70s or the 60s, that you could rely upon. Don't mean it was going to be always quality. Don't mean you were always going to get service, but you knew, these social services exist if you were homeless or there were some issues with food, there were stamps and all those things that you can kind of qualify on that you at least wouldn't starve. Might not be that healthy, might be diabetic, but you wouldn't at least immediately starve. So as that get cuts, we get and deliberately cut, we get this mass explosion of nonprofits to cover what once social services once did. All right, so, but I'm laying that out because part of this formula we've been having to look at, like, all right, there's not, I can't necessarily, I can go to a trade union and say, hey, I'm gonna use my own organization as an example. Cooperation Jackson wants to do this program, and we want, we need to team up because we have a limited amount of resources. You got a limited amount of resources, both human and material. So let's combine forces, pull a program together to meet these particular goals and objectives within our community. Right, that's very limited. But there's not a whole, a range of organizations that either have the resources or the political commitment to want to kind of, do a level of organizing this. So what I'm left with, and the reality of what we're left with, is basically trying to appeal to a large number of individuals on a much more horizontal level to say, hey, let's pull together this project to do some farming, to do X, Y, and Z. Now, how do you turn that weakness into a strength? That's what we've been trying to think about. And one of the things that when you stand back and you look at all these different types of activities, there are actually millions of people who are engaged in them, but just not in a coordinated way, right? You got millions of people in the United States now, with some left orientation of some form or fashion. I'll stick to that particular example, who are doing some form of gardening, either for themselves or some small, community project. Now imagine if we were all coordinating what we were doing to say we're going to try to ensure a level of caloric intake for all our communities. And then we start to plan that out, even at micro scales. I'm going to grow this tomatoes and try to grow this amount. You grow carrots, you grow some cabbage, you grow some greens. And then, I'll take this portion for myself. This portion will be open, for broad community use and trade. And imagine if we can take those millions of folks in a coordinated way to do that. You actually have a bit of scale, right? You actually have a bit of scale when you step out and look at it and aggregate it. So, what this is trying to do, what our formula is basically trying to do, is say there's some basic fundamental needs that have to get met. And there's some basic kind of things that are already within our province to do, and that millions of people are already doing. And the question becomes then, how do we coordinate? Not that you have to get down with me on every point politically, but if we're going to do some mutual aid projects, I need you to agree on doing the mutual aid work. And I need you just to agree on being coordinated and disciplined around what time we're going to do this work, how the work is going to be done, how we're going to treat each other in the context of doing the work, some of the who, what, when, where, how. We need to agree upon that, right? You may have a certain objective that you want to pursue, and that's cool, but the basic thing is right now we know we need to basically ensure a basic minimal level of food security and resource security in our communities in order to make sure that folks don't kind of drift off further into a reactionary camp or just, basically starve to death. And the system will do that to us. Don't have no illusions that it won't, right? Study history deeply. I'll cite one, some of this recent reference of folks talking about Winston Churchill and praising him, for something that came up. Winston Churchill starved, millions of Bengalis and was racist as hell. Ain't nothing to praise there at all when you put in the final context. So anyway, but coming back, this trying to engage folks, whether you are anarchist, whether you are social, Democrat, take Jackson, for example. We need to be working together, at least on this. And that doesn't impact your program and you trying to pursue your own objective aims. But in terms of meeting these basic needs and requirements of our community, to fortify its overall position relative to the forces of white supremacy and repression, let's get down with that. Right. So I just wanted to frame that before, maybe talking about it, because what it's trying to do is take what concretely exists, both politically and ideologically, and kind of, doing some judo. Let's flip that on its head and just find a set of practices that we can engage with, which don't necessarily eliminate those political and ideological divides in and of themselves immediately, but at least put us in a set of, some practice with each other where we start to deal with the actual material needs. Now, I'm not going to lie, the objective is at some point, us doing this work and doing it deeply leads us to new political conclusions. Right. And if folks would then have to kind of, if you're expecting a certain level of reform to come, and after like 5-10 years it's not going to come, and the balance of forces, shifts and people move away from those programs, then you're going to have to kind of look more internally and say, okay, what are the things that we have to do for ourselves? And then what are the things that we need in order to shift our position, actually exercise power that gives us, the self-determination that we need to secure our own lives. So it's I'm not saying that we don't want to move politically. Please don't accuse me of that. It's the question of how do we do it, right? And I think one of the things that I've come to deeply learn and appreciate, folks that may have heard me say it, but I'll say it again. I think it's easier for us to act our way into new, forms of thinking than it is to think our ways into new forms of action. So let's get down and dirty with each other. So the pieces that we've kind of defined in this program of saying, like, look, the first basis of what we need to start with is mutual aid, right? And there's already, millions of people in the United States. Again, I'm gonna limit my comments on this just to there. Even though I think there is a generalized way in a lot of countries, you can do a lot of these things. So mutual aid, and stress on the mutual and not charity. And there is a difference, right? And I think a lot of time folks just think like, we're going to set up like a food bank or food distribution. And the mutual winds up being in the organizers, the people who put that together, doing a level of self-exploitation to their volunteer labor, basically putting all this together to be of service in the community is something that is the mutual. Now, I would argue, that's a level of mutuality within the organizers, but in relationship to the community, you actually got to start building a relationship wherein we are all making certain sacrifices, but also getting certain rewards, right? Because we don't want to leave people in a situation where they have to be dependent upon us. At the end of the day, at least not dependency where, well, if I don't show up this day, your needs are not going to get met, right? Or if I don't want to deal with you, because I didn't like the way you looked or whatever the situation, your needs not going to get met. No, we got to set it up to be like, hey, this is going to happen, even if you're an asshole, this you're going to get some food because you're putting in some work also in a broad collective process to be able to meet the collective need, right? So we gotta structure our pieces to bring folks in to the organized activity of meeting each other's needs. But the fundamental piece around the mutual aid, I want folks to understand, is that's where we begin to, when we engage it in a broad sense, we get a deeper sense of what is actually happening, to folks at every level in our community. And we can get a fuller picture of what the needs concretely are, not speculation and not just purely kind of market-driven orientations. But if we're doing it right, we'll start figure out, oh, there's a need for childcare here. There's a need for healthcare here, right? And then we're going to have to figure out, if we're serious, how do we start meeting these needs? And what other things do we need to kind of like tap into, just to say on those two things alone? Can we set up, some childcare, services, not just for the time that we're doing this, but to give, single parents, relief and meet their needs, make sure the kids are safe. Can we make sure that we are figuring out ways, to tap into medicine, organizing, probably nurses are typically the most amenable, towards social needs. So like, hey, can we organize some nurses to figure out how do we get antibiotics? How do we get X, Y, and Z, right? So there's a piece around that if we're doing it right, I would argue, right, where we're using this to not spy on people, but to gather information. And if folks come up, if we just starting with food and clothes, that's cool, but I need some other things as well. I need some more secure housing. In a place like Jackson, is like, all right, there's a ton of vacant houses out here. What can we do now that we clearly understand their need? Can we organize a labor pool of volunteers with a bunch of folks? Let's go take this house, fix it up, set it up, rig it up, run some electricity to it, figure out, some water access. Now, I'm citing these as practical things because I want folks to think about this to scale and what it takes to do. And then the other piece that the second kind of tier of that is moving towards, a first level of food security, but striving to get to a degree of food sovereignty, like in your local area, in your community. And that's where you start to appeal, in an organized sense for all the folks who are already doing a level of kind of autonomous production in these areas, to the, community garden and things of that nature. Do it in a coordinated way of saying, our mutual aid work has told us this many people per week, need these types of foods. Can we now sit down and plan out our activities in such a way we can start meeting some of those needs and offset the cost of having to go, either purchase it, right, in this donation type orientation? Can we offset that and eventually overcome that by scaling our production in such a way that we can exchange, time and labor for the materials that we need to maximize this production? Can we do that, right? To kind of meet these needs. Now, the third, and I'm gonna go quick because I'm sitting there looking at the time. And I know some of the stuff can go on for a while. The third piece in this is really pushing it up for worker self-organization. Now, earlier articulation, we were calling this kind of like cooperative organizing, but it was like, now the vast majority, at least in the United States, and I would argue in the world, the vast majority of people who are laboring, whether they're producing surplus value or not, but are laboring, right? They're not in either a trade union or a co-op. But how do we position, starting with those of us who are doing co-ops or trade unions, first and foremost, how do we combine our collective efforts to be able to be in a position to encourage folks to democratize, i.e. take over their workplaces, right? And how do we not view them as being competitive forces, but forces that we ultimately need, to be in some jettison with, to be able to kind of plan out again on a higher level meeting the direct needs of all of our people, right? And knowing, the cycle of distribution, which comes in, when is this freight coming in? When is this truck coming in? What's on it? What's happening? What do we need? How do we distribute, various things, and then how do we produce on an enhanced level in our own local communities, some of the things we need. And that's where the fourth kind of tier comes in, this level of production, and trying to do it in ecologically a sustainable way, which means, to a degree, localizing more production, but also trying to, transforming what we produce and why. So we don't have to, kind of further kind of extract from indigenous people or from the third world, and shift that, in such a way. And so that particular component that we pushing is called community production, and this local, like, kind of production at scale, but also kind of, centering that up directly within, the means of production that are advancing that we can directly control. Now, the other pieces to this, just being on the shorthand, you can do all this, but if you can't defend it, don't matter. So you got to build in, at a qualitative point, but be thinking about it from the start. What are the self-defense, type mechanisms that we have to defend ourselves, from the forces of capital, who are definitely going to come looking for us at the level of both extracting resources, from them, and also stopping them from reaching their profit goals, either through our own productive activities or the efforts at, like, democratizing workplaces, halting their circuits, of distribution and accumulation through, retail, stores, etc. So you're gonna have to be able to defend your gains and defend them against right forces. And then the final piece, in just summation, you're gonna have to, like, dialogue about how all of this, gets coordinated, and who does it serve. And so that, you may call that a people's assembly or, town hall, whatever. The basic point is broad horizontal democratic practice, that mediates the self-defense and mediates production as two kind of core pieces. And then from that, you can do a broader level of social organization. So that's what we've been pushing. And then the concrete thing is just like, how do we start from where we at? Not speculate, not people are doing all these things. We all getting our ass up and going to work, every day in one form or fashion. But why not coordinate with the folks I'm working with, what the terms are, what are we working under? So, it's trying to be both practical and concrete, but saying, like, we are already doing some things that point in a new direction. Like, let's start with that a fact, but it's limited by lack of coordination, lack of planning, and lack of politicization. And that's the particular piece where, we want to engage with each other to reach this higher level of politicization. I would say from my vantage point in engaging, always, we are doing this to get to this point, because I don't think you just, I think we need to clearly articulate what our politics are with the folks that we engage in, to give them the democratic right to say, I'm gonna deal with you, I'm not gonna deal with you, but not make the practice so rigid, like, well, if you don't agree with me, you can't farm with me or you can't work with me. Like, no, this is what I believe, this is why I'm doing this, but I want to help meet your needs and help secure mine. So we need to do this, collectively. So you can believe whatever you want to believe. You can believe in Jesus, Allah, whatever. That don't particularly matter relative to us putting seed in the ground, or us fixing this house, whatever the situation is, to meet that need. But through an active process of constant engagement, it's like, all right, you can keep that, but I want you to have a deeper understanding of the need to socialize all of these different particular pieces rather than individual, attempts at accumulation, which are unreal and unsustainable.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that. And there's a couple different directions we could definitely go from there. But I think one question that I could see folks possibly arising at, especially folks that are, oriented from, say, a revolutionary left politic, right, is like, then you said a little bit about, by bringing people together in certain set of practices, that over time also, that then their understanding of why they have to engage in these practices and what they're doing together, can lead to a kind of political transition, right? Because I think, some people could say, yeah, the mutual aid aspect, I could see the social aspect of it, the political, the meeting of the needs, which obviously is something that we all believe in. But at a certain point, we're also playing a level of triage, or and so how do we then think about it as having a revolutionary trajectory, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'm not interested in no triage. Let me make that very clear. Right. And the point is, how do we build our base? So let's just cut through the chase. How do you build a base from your abstract little, political club? And I've been in that for long, most of my life. How do I move beyond that? How do we move beyond that to deal with folks who probably don't give a shit about half the stuff we sitting and talking about? But like, I need to eat, right? And if this is going to help me eat, then I'll listen, and through time maybe get grounded. Ain't no guarantee, right? We need to stop talking about ain't no guarantee that folks gonna move in this direction. But if we don't engage people, we for sure enough ain't gonna get there. So you got to make a choice, right? And I'm one of them people on certain fundamental things. I'm probably as dogmatic, hardcore, uncompromising as it come. A real asshole on certain points. Anybody know me will tell you that. But there is a certain level of like, no, I'm gonna hold the position, and then I'm gonna sit down and try to do what I can do with you, right? With the hopefully I'm doing mature understanding. You ain't got to agree with me on every point. Hell, I don't agree. I don't believe in the same thing I was believing 20 years ago. Right. So I don't, I'm like, okay, all right. I'm gonna kind of take you for where you at. But the point is, through our engagement, neither one of us should be at the same place if we where we started. If we have a serious interaction and commitment to practice with each other, we both gonna learn something from this engagement that's gonna shape us, and adjust our practice, hopefully for the better as opposed to the worse. But that could also happen. Negative lessons are just as good as positive lessons, properly applied. But it's the question of what is our practice. And that don't mean I don't want to get everybody, mean that we all got to be doing the same thing. That's not what I'm saying, right? But I need to be, like I'm not directly, I don't directly farm most of the time. I get out there and get dirty with our crew every once in a while. That's not my particular role. But my role is to make sure the folks who are doing that at this stage of the game, just speaking about our work in Cooperation Jackson, my job is to make sure they got what they need. Right. And that we have an agreed upon understanding that we are doing this, right, to ensure a level of food security and that move towards food sovereignty, which means we have to recruit other folks because our little 10 farmers, they ain't gonna produce enough food, for 20,000 people in Jackson. So then there's a reality of scale. Like, well, what do we have to do? All right, we got to teach, a couple of hundred people and convince a couple of hundred people that they need to be involved in this. And those that are involved in it, they need to be involved at the level of like, I know some of y'all are trying to grow to make some income. I ain't gonna stop you or hate you on that, right? Because at the reality, I don't have no alternative source of income for you. So I deal with the system as it is, not how I imagine it to be. But can I entreat you to be like, can you do a level of production that we can then put in a broad system of collective distribution to then meet folks where they're at? We're doing a concrete piece, example of that, trying to grow on it, through this really, really free market piece that we've been doing, this year. And we've tried this and failed and tried and failed. And that's another piece, you can't be afraid of failure. Because at least I would say with us, each iteration that we've been doing this the past 10 years, we fail better each time. Right? Like, okay, all right, we that didn't work. Let's sit down, study, analyze it. We had some presumptions here, or this particular force wasn't reliable, or this wind up costing more than we thought. There will wind up being some hidden costs or X, Y, and Z. So we're gonna do it differently this time based on X, Y, and Z. And that's the type of if I would argue, if we're serious, we're gonna have to get dirty in the practical, sense, to build up our collective capacities, because using the old school term, which I don't think is just as relevant as what it was, we are trying to get to the place where, we don't want to be governed, but we are doing the governing directly through our day-to-day activities. Right, because the ultimate end of this is to eliminate, from my perspective, eliminate all these abstract entities like the state and all this stuff, from directly, determining our lives and shaping it, and being able to get, back to where there's the direct mediated relationship between myself, my community, and the earth. That's sustainable, to ensure that we need, and we're not, toiling, kind of needlessly, in ways to make our ends meet when we now have the full benefit of 10,000 years of human knowledge and accumulation on how to do these things in a way that is not destructive, but we need to employ them in a way that's not dependent upon commodity production and commodity relations. Like that's where I would argue we ultimately trying to go, but we got to start in the practical senses of what our people are doing, and how do we put that together, and at every point you still need to put politics in command. That's not, like I said, you don't do that and not have a conversation. You do it to have a conversation. So we're not just talking to each other, right? And the piece I think I've seen that so many people get fearful of is not knowing how to deal with some of the reactionary beliefs that come up in conversation with folks in our community.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're not going to change that by shying away from folks who hold those beliefs. Right, you got to be there with every day. Like, all right, well, why you think women need to be in that role, or why you think immigrants need to come back? Where you get that from? What's where's that up? This conversation, which is ripe in some of the Black community in Jackson, I think this kind of creeping anti-immigrant sentiment coming from the right, but also from folks understand of their experience. Or they're taking our job. Well, who said that was your job? If it was your job, they couldn't take it. If you controlled it, couldn't nobody take it. Couldn't nobody dislodge from you. So they don't belong to you, right? That's a relationship that you are embedded within, and the employer is going to go with who could they exploit the most. Period. Point blank. At the end of the day, black, white, green, purple, that shit don't matter to them at the end of the day at all. It's just how much money, extract, I can exploit you for, that's going to enliven my pockets. So like, how to be in solidarity with folks, who may not look like you, who may not speak your language, but y'all fundamentally in the same position. But you got to be with people to have this conversation, and don't expect that they're going to change their views tomorrow because you don't have one conversation or one debate. That's not how that works, right? It's going to be painful, and you have to deal with sometimes, deal with a lot of folks, and a lot, issues come up, reemerge. There advances in the practice, and then there's retreats, because some little incident happens, and how people subjectively deal with that. But if we're not there in a particular way, kind of, struggling with people to counter all this, right bullshit, it's going to win. Right? It's going to win. So our job, I think, at this point as the left is how do we figure out how to really dig in and get dirty on the ground in our communities. That don't mean you don't do your study groups. That don't mean, X, Y, you try to refine your knowledge, your grasp of theory and all this other kind of stuff and following, world trends. The reality of it is you got to do it all. And so there's a need to kind of step up, not step back, I think, in this particular period. But a critical piece that's been missing, and let's just be real, the critical piece that's been missing in the United States for so many forces is that direct engagement with actual working class folks, that we got to get back to.
Totally. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think so I think we can jump into some kind of like scenarios regarding also the rise of different electoral forces and how this might shape some of the things that we'll have to deal with. And I know that in particular, you operating in Jackson and being in a deep red state, and dealing with some of the things that you have dealt with there, as well as monitoring some of the forces that are around you, that particularly the what you describe as the neo-fascist, neoconservative forces, are something that and maybe we could talk about this a little bit more too, of you see them rising, no matter what, basically, and partly because or not partly, but because capitalism, kind of necessitates certain forms of population control, etc., around imperialism, climate destruction that they've created, borders, all these kind of things. um and the rise of disasters related to climate change, things like this. So w- let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about the right. Let's say Trump wins the election, right?
Hmm.
To make
Hmm.
it give people a concrete thing, or that he loses the election but they take it anyway. Um and uh and so yeah, let's do that. Run through that
Okay.
scenario a bit in your mind.
Um, Let me start saying this to make it clear. The forces of fascism don't need Trump to move their program. And their program was moving at a steady pace and advancing well before, he became the Pied Piper, of their program. All right. So there's a degree by which having a Pied Piper has sharpened some things up, particularly for liberal forces, and scared them into certain degrees of action. But just removing him from the equation is not going to stop their advance. I want everybody to understand that and grapple with that. And why do I say this? He ain't been in office for 4 years. Look at what's happening in Texas. Look at what's happening in Florida. Look at what's happening in Mississippi. Look at what's happening in Louisiana, right? There's Bible verses in almost every school now in Louisiana. Trump ain't had nothing to do with that, right? So their program does not necessitate him being there. And let's come back to that, because what I'm getting at, to be clear, there's too much. I would argue there's too much emphasis on the singular office of the presidency. Too much. And if you are going to, and if certain forces of the left are going to focus on the office of the presidency as a kind of a singular galvanizing focus of our organizing work and trying to develop these popular fronts, then you got to be real about what that role fundamentally is, which is more international, in fact, in terms of what his task, or he or she or they task is relative to sitting in that chair, than it is domestic. And so you can't shy away from Palestine if and what is actually being done in the real, if that is your focus, right? And you think they need to be stopped, because then you have to deal with some hard questions about who is actually conducting the genocide now, and is that who you ultimately want to rely upon, or are you willing to trade a right for a right and your access and privilege for somebody else's death and destruction? Because that's the real of what's being mediated here in the concrete, not some abstract bullshit. All right, but that being said, all right, to the question, and I just wanted to say that as a premise and then come back. If Trump wins, and I still let me put this out, I'm still assuming he is going to win. And I'm assuming that on the basis of dynamics of how most voters in the United States historically determine their vote, and that international, things in the United States rarely have an impact on how people vote. And that is what the Democrats themselves are actually voting on. They think they can have their cake and eat it too, and that most folks don't give a damn about the Palestinians. And if we lose the Palestinian or Arab and is Muslim vote, hopefully we can make up for it by greater turnout, in other key sectors, primarily amongst Black and Latinos, to offset that. That's a risky game, but that's the game that they're playing right now, right? But okay, so Trump wins. No immediate violence, at least through the period of quote unquote transition, I think will occur. And what do I mean? Like, that means November, December, January will be relatively quiet in terms of direct repression. It will mean a serious liberal scrambling and panic on the other side of that equation. It means that the liberals are going to start throwing millions more dollars than what they've thrown over the last 8 years into the nonprofit, kind of structures to kind of hype up a certain level of kind of civic defense. They're going to try to come up with all these legal cases at the, state and federal levels. They'll be blocked at every turn on that scene because of the anything of any merit is ultimately going to have to go to the Supreme Court, and we know where the Supreme Court is going to go at the end of the day. So there'll be an extreme panic. And then on the other side, what Trump and his crew is going to do, even though they've been kind of publicly trying to distance themselves from Project 2025, the key component that will immediately take place, and I'm not, and these are things, don't think I'm speculating here. I read their shit. So, and follow them closely. I'm telling you things that they already planning on doing, at least on the right. And just knowing how, the nonprofit, the NGO social movement game also works, for being in and out of it. So the right has already got in motion a list of candidates that they're going to position to take over the core offices of the federal government and to be in place to fully execute and put all their people fundamentally in place by their own definition by the end of June of 2025. And when they mean that they want to gut the federal government, believe them when they say that. So you can anticipate, like in February, a mass house cleaning of a bunch of federal agencies if Trump wins, and the installing of just straight, that's just, party cadre into all those offices to run their program and to execute as much as Project 2025 as possible. Now, keep in mind, he is now going to have the benefit of actually having sat in that chair before. So before, you can see some signs he didn't quite know what he was doing. He was relying on, a bunch of insiders the first go around who could block certain things, who stalled a number of different things, who tried to apply certain, standard rules and operations to be like, well, you got to go through this or you got to go through that. This will violate this law. That's going to be all out the door. And so he's going to ram it down everybody's throats, him and his forces, him and his team. And you best believe, with Clarence Thomas in particular leading the helm, the Supreme Court is going to be ready to back that play 100%. I think that they are going to probably win the majority of the Senate. So they'll have that level of coverage. I think they'll probably lose the House. But they don't, at the end of the day, to a certain extent, you don't really need the House in terms of how things actually work. The key, authoritative element there is the Senate. And if they can just kind of maneuver or pressure enough, wrangle up enough votes, they can move what they want. Now, the question is really going to be who's going to be in control of the Senate, should they win? And that's an open question. Probably I would argue one of the biggest open questions. For sure, it's going to be somebody Trump will appoint. It was going to work with his program. But there is a subjective level of skill of how to be able to move and treat with the Democrats, and then what their aim and objective is going to be. Now, in order to I think forestall the hard cut edges of this, folks should expect, folks like Schumer to offer as many compromises to bend on a number of different things in order to forestall and protect a certain set of elite privileges and institutions that the Democratic Party wants to ensure remain in place. And those interests have nothing to do with the interests of the vast majority of working class people in the United States. Most of those are just going to be to ensure that there's certain geopolitical interests are preserved and maintained. And this is where probably a certain level of conflict will emerge, because it's very clear the piece where these two, factions of representative of bourgeois interests disagree is on the Ukraine. And so, where Schumer and those folks, and I'm assuming Schumer is going to be the one back at the helm in the Senate. So let me, that's why I'm saying that, throwing his name out. They're going to try to say, let's compromise, but let's compromise in a way that Ukraine could say, join NATO, right? But if Trump can get, pull Putin back, pull the Russians back, and maybe have them assess to giving up parts of the land claims in Ukraine. They may go with that, right? Trump could probably pull something like that off. So I think they'll try to immediately kind of construct a deal where a certain level of commitment towards the NATO orientation remains, but that's going to be a clear, serious struggle, because Trump don't have no real commitment, and his forces, they don't have no real commitment to NATO. Now, I don't think they will just totally eliminate it this go around, as he was threatening to do last time, because at the end of the day, his calculus is we're going to need folks to go to war first with Iran and then with China. And so NATO will be a help to the degree that he can wrangle it in. But the terms under which he will want to wrangle it in is basically a rentier one. Like, y'all going to have to pay to play. Y'all going to have to, pay for our security. Right. So that's going to kind of tip the balance around NATO pretty significantly. And with Macron, who, for those who don't know, the French president, with him being kind of on the ropes, it's not really clear who's going to come to the defense of NATO, because he's NATO's biggest champion, but he's also, for those who've been following it, Macron has been threatening to a degree that Europe needs to create its own force. And he was able, in part, to have that conversation, which would have been unspeakable, say, just 20 years ago, right? He's able to have that conversation because of how Trump, during the first term, shifted the balance and shifted the level of, can we really depend upon the United States? And if they're very clear that if Trump gets back on, we can't, right? And then we're gonna have to start looking out for some of our own interests. But with him being off the table, with the far right, AFT gaining ground in Germany, and may be able to actually in the next elections, which are coming up soon in Germany, make a real play for federal level or national level power. They're not going to win. I don't think they won't win the chancellorship, but I think they may be strong enough to dictate the agenda. And folks need to understand sometimes not having the office, but being able to determine the agenda is actually the most powerful position to be in. That's the position that Le Pen is in right now. Like she's finally the kingmaker. That choice that you just saw I forget the name, Barnier, who they just chose, who used to be the old EU negotiator around Brexit. Bringing him in, that's the fascists. That was them saying, we'll treat with this dude. And what you got to do, and one of the first things he said when he gave his little speech, I watched it, we're going to cut immigration. Straight up sold out the left. So like, the left and the Popular Front, that's literally what it's called, hastily kind of got together, allegedly, to stop the right from gaining power, and they stopped Le Pen from actually holding the seat. But that don't mean she can't wield power, and that's going back to the first part. That's the lesson that we got to learn about how power actually functions and works, and it's not always about who's in that seat. And I'm bringing that back to Trump, because it doesn't matter necessarily if he's in that seat. These are the dynamics of where the capitalist system is. It has to go in this type of direction, because that's the only way profits are going to be met, and there's going to be enough discipline to enforce their rule on large parts of the planet, including me and you. So, I think that's the what I just tried to lay out as a basic scenario of how their governance is going to roll out, and what are the three components that, should Trump win, will be in play to kind of ensure that Project 2025 and more can be fully executed and implemented. They're going to be in a right position to do that should he win, and should they gain control of the Senate. Now, if they don't gain control of the Senate, he's going to have to kind of then be a dictator on day one, which he said, to kind of force a number of changes through, and hold hostage the federal process, primarily through appropriations first, but also then through an alliance of the states, like the 32 states that have Republican governorships, to then force them to mediate his policies and execute that. Which is, again, I'm seeing why they don't really need him, because they can run their state strategy as a national strategy with or without him. It'll be more effective with him, mind you, right? But they don't necessarily need it, to kind of move their piece forward. Now, the wild card in all this is, of course, the U.S. military, the Pentagon. That's the real wild card here. It's not clear where they're going to go. Now, if they adhere to the Constitution, they will limit the execution of certain unlawful orders. And I think we have a sense of what some of those would be, but that's not completely clear to anything I've read, known, or say. And if he is able to install his own brass, right, his own commanders, then all right, it's a lock. You can forget about elections from that point forward, right? That now who will succeed, because he ain't that young. Who would succeed him would be in question, and that in part is why he chose Vance, right? Don't think that they don't have no long-term strategy. He wasn't just a random choice. And the set of things that he's allied with, and I think that one was to in part to send a signal to a certain faction within the armed forces. All right, we got some inside play here and somebody who knows how those things function and operate, right? So, play ball with us in this way, and there's a long-term succession, kind of orientation to keep the ball rolling, if you would. Now, if the Democrats, if Harris should win, then I think we're facing a different set of scenario, a profoundly different one. One that would be much more immediately violent, right? And so, to a degree, on the immediate tip, I'm much more concerned, to be quite honest with you, with her winning than I am with her losing. Because, from where I sit, and I'm going these days back and forth between Jackson and New Orleans, that's, I'm in Trump country. There's a couple of seas of blue in there where black people live, but we surrounded, we got Maoism in reverse. We surrounded, down here by a whole slew of reactionary forces who are armed to the teeth, who know how to use them, right? Either from just, standard generational practices of hunting and gaming, but also the number of folks in the tradition down this way about sending folks to the military, sons and daughters, sending folks to the military to get trained. So it's not like, we dealing with some disorganized, untrained forces or a gang who can't shoot straight. That's not the situation, down this way. Some other places it's less concentrated, throughout the empire, but it's deeply concentrated in that way here. So, for me, there's a practical piece of like, all right, should she win, they are not going to accept defeat. They've already said that. They're already playing that. I was watching last night, some of, and this is part of what I do in little spare moments of my time, multitasking. I've been watching all of Trump's fundraising commercials on YouTube. They're hilarious as shit. So, if you want some deep, ironic humor, torture yourself with that. You'll get a laugh out. One of them, he was talking about Kamala wants to cancel Christmas on a fundraising ad, man, that she was going to cancel Christmas, and if he was elected, he was going to defend Christmas and save Christmas and bring Christmas back, right? But all seriousness, in these commercials, he's already laying the clear basis that they're gonna steal it, and if they steal it, I'm gonna need you to get down with me, So all the dog whistles are clearly there, and he's gonna ramp this up because I think clearly there's a level of panic that him and his forces are starting to clearly demonstrate, and so they're kind of resorting to executing Plan B, which is holy hell and chaos, and January 6th then amounts to practice. And imagine that, to greater scale. This time, it won't be just militia oriented. It'll be in Texas, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee. It will have in a few other maybe Midwestern states. It'll actually have state sanction this time, and not just militia, right? And I'm, again, why I'm saying that, you got states like Utah, you got states like Texas, which have already said on a legislative level, things that have been passed by their governors, that they are not going to follow certain aspects they're not going to follow unlawful orders coming from the federal government. So there's already been these little declarations of what's the term? I'm forgetting it right now. Secession. There's already been these little secessionist acts that have been committed over the past couple of years, and there's already been, what Abbott and them put together, that coalition, to defy the federal government around immigration and who gets to control the border of Texas. Like that's already go back and look at that. That's already straight up like an act of secession, right? And I think folks just want to see what they want to see to a certain extent and believe what they want to believe relative to where the right actually is and what is actually prepared to do and what it's already declared and positioned itself to do, right? They already on that journey. They already on that move, right? They already made that clear. And that coalition will be enacted and move. So the violence just won't be, I think, many places it'll be random, but not completely. So you could expect, they're already on their horns. Some of the sheriff's offices, in Mississippi, monitoring the CBs and stuff like that. They're already joking on the horn, talking about the checkpoints and stuff they're gonna execute, and the things, the shakedowns and stuff they're gonna do. These are people in office. This ain't no militia. This ain't the Proud Boys. This ain't, the Oath Keepers. This is the sheriff's offices in various places. And I can monitor Mississippi. I can only imagine the same conversation is happening in parts of, all throughout the Deep South at the very least, and I'm sure far beyond. So, the game is in play, and what concerns me the most, the Democrats do not have an articulated program of how they're going to defend people should Kamala win. Right? They are relying upon the institutions as is to defend basic bourgeois rights. And I want y'all to think, those of y'all who are supporting Kamala, you think the Democratic forces which are building cop cities everywhere going to actually defend our rights? Is that what you betting on? Y'all need something, I want to hear what that ain't gonna work. They're not gonna save me or you. That's not what's gonna happen, right? So they don't really have no plan, man. That's not to deal with this, not to deal with this, and and what you see them scrambling at is, the Democrats trying to execute their own element of a popular front strategy. So that's this whole, piece around, if she's elected, she's going to put Republicans in her cabinet. That's not a tongue-in-cheek thing. She means that, right? And this whole piece of them, planning out and trying to position Dick Cheney, for his endorsement to come out, a couple of days, before they actually have this debate, if that actual thing actually, is going to happen, is to try to pry and split their forces, but also indicate, we're willing to play ball if y'all can call off some of the dogs and roll with us on this, and then we'll compromise with y'all on certain key things. And the clearest compromise, I should say, is look at her program around the border, right, and immigration. That's basically what Trump was arguing for 4 years ago. That's his program, right? That's his program. So, that shows the level of compromise these folks are really clearly willing to engage in, and the terms that they're willing to set in terms of their rule. But are they going to be able to keep everything firmly in place at the level of the states? That remains to be seen. Now, what I would say, at least right now, what they kind of got in their favor is that the top brass over at the Pentagon is firmly aligned with the Democrats. And so that will be, one level of advantage, that if they have to deploy you know, the federal government, I mean, the military, the U.S. military, if they have to deploy them in certain strategic areas, I think they will be able to do that, you know, and kind of, you know, suppress a certain degree of a kind of an open rebellion. But that's just a short-term solution. I hope folks understand that. That's just a short-term solution, you know. So look, man, the what I've been telling folks, the fascists got a winning hand. You know, if I was one of them, I'm like, I'm licking my chops right now, right? You know, I win either way. You know what I'm saying? Either my boy gets in office, right, and we actually control the institutions and can implement what we want, or homeboy loses, and this civil war that I've been talking about just steps one, you know, just moves one step further, and for them to have to then impose, you know, direct military force and pressure only justifies all the arguments I've been making about the deep state and everything else, and gives more license for a general plan of disruption. And they are stupidly playing into this shit, in my opinion, by dragging Russiagate out of the trash can and putting it back in play. Like, y'all gonna do that right before? Was it? We got what, 50-something days, 60-something days now before the election? Like, you do realize that's only confirming their worldview. It's not opposing it, right? And then, you know, those of us on the left, you know, please make the connection, because I've been very disappointed that, you know, that the case around the comrades from the Uhuru movement has not been getting hardly any play. And, you know, this later Russiagate and that case, those are directly related. And it's not by, I would argue, it's not by chance or it's random that they announced this whole thing on the second day of the trial, because the trial started, you know, this past week, you know, down in Florida. And so if they are able to really get away with these two things, it's going to be the neoliberals, which do everything that they are, you know, folks are worried and threatened about what Project 2025 is threatening to do. They are already in play doing now, which is limiting democratic speech, freedom of expression. All them bourgeois whites we were talking about. If you don't toe that line, your ass is going to, you know, prison, and you're going to be silenced or deplatformed, or all of the above. That's what's really at play. I mean, I don't give a damn about what they talking about and if they supporting Putin or not. That's not the point, right? The point is who gets to speak and what are the consequences for being in opposition, right? And these are the clear pieces. So again, I'm saying to all the folks who are listening to this, all my folks, you know, on the left who are going down with Kamala, you asking folks who are instituting Cop City, who are charging people right now, you know, with RICO cases down in Georgia, y'all asking them to protect us. You think that's really gonna work? You think that's really gonna happen? And you think we gonna have enough space to run our program and agenda when it runs in opposition to theirs, particularly around issues of Palestine? Palestine ain't going away, right? And you look at what they're already doing, you know, now throughout the country, particularly at the college, you know, level, how many professors are getting fired right now, you know, for just offering courses where they mention Zionism or criticize it in any form or fashion. These are Democrats and liberal institutions like Columbia, which are executing this. So that's who y'all allying with, right? And where is that ultimately going to lead? Particularly, again, I'm gonna bring up that. So are we all now prepared to throw Palestine under the bus? right? In order to, abstractly protect some space, which the Democrats themselves are already limiting in practice, not in theory, in practice, that they already limiting. And what's, if and for them, keeping the peace means certain folks going to have to be sacrificed. That's typically us. So, to me, I'm like, at the end of the day, we might as well win, lose, or draw. We, ain't neither one of our friends. We might as well organize in our own damn interest, because that's the only thing that's going to save us anyway.
Yeah, and I want that's where I want to go back to, next. I appreciate you laying all of that out for folks. And so you talked about the food component, about meeting needs, also about the need to defend that capacity, and one of the things that always as I hear you discuss this, that I'm struck with, and is the inadequacy of self-defense within the left as it currently stands, partly due to how disorganized it is, or how the lack of coordination that you kind of talked about, the pockets of isolation, the the neoliberal kind of individual orientation that a lot of us unfortunately have and shouldn't. um that there's a capacity that we desperately need to ramp up there, and that there's, as you lay out what you just laid out, the prospects of self-defense are pretty bleak as they currently stand. And so, what's your orientation towards that? I know we on YouTube, the State Department's YouTube, we can't get into too much detail on all of that, but how do you think about um getting people more serious about kind of organizing on that level?
Well, look, let me say this. At this level, certain aspects of it, it's a little too little too late. So at this juncture, between now and November, you got what you got. Try to stock up as best you can. There's a lot of shortages out there on critical pieces, depending on what you got. But try to stock up on that, if only as an insurance policy, if nothing else, right? But recognize the material. This is why things ultimately got to be organized, right? Because if you study earlier periods, and I'm gonna draw people to some of the interviews that Gerald Horne is now doing on his new book around armed struggle ? Right? I'm just now getting into the book, but been following some of the interviews, and knowing some of that history intimately. What would often happen, particularly against the Panthers and the Black Liberation Army, AIM, some other forces. Folks did some like in LA, in some other places, use in New Orleans, use some of the military training that they had to kind of fortify their positions. Mississippi too, what happened with the RNA shootout, in Jackson. People use some of their knowledge from being in the military, to fortify their positions well enough that, a few people got hurt in some of those engagements with the overwhelming, firepower that the state possessed relative to our forces. Nobody got, killed. People got arrested, detained, still in prison, but nobody got killed. So you got to learn some of those skills, to the degree that you can. It doesn't hurt. I'll say this: it doesn't hurt to go to even a Barnes and Nobles and get some of the Army field manual things that teach you, how to survive. A lot of Barnes and Nobles typically have them right out in the front of the store that you kind of just pass by often at a discount. And, you know, there's some essential skills to learn in those things that is public. I'm not saying anything here about you acquiring knowledge that will get you in trouble because they sell it at Barnes and Nobles, or you can buy it on Amazon, or, you know, whatever. So go do that. But the piece around, I'm saying, you know, kind of stock up, and where I was going with that is, you know, as Malik Rahim often kind of, I've heard him tell us the story too many times, like, you know, we didn't have a shootout in New Orleans. We had a shoot in, meaning that the police, they ran out of bullets. This is stated plainly. And the police just kept barraging because, you know, they're supplied to the source. We are not. So, you know, our measures are about buying time and being able to move people into better positions. That is the cold reality of what we are dealing with on a practical level, and the immediate, you know, kind of threats in terms of assessing threats, and you need to. And this is why I'm saying going back and look at, you know, someone interviewed at Gerald Horn, how he breaks down, you know, armed propaganda, armed struggle, you know, what the differences are, and their difference, and then self-defense has a corresponding kind of inverse, you know, sense of what you're looking at and what you're trying to do. And the aim and objective is to survive and move. You know, we're not in a position, nor do we have the capacity to outgun, you know, even the militias that exist in large parts of the South. We haven't done that. So let's just be real. We haven't done that. So, you know, but there is a level of just practical, you know, can you move? Can you get from place to place? And tools are helpful, you know, in that regard to doing that. So you got a little bit of time, you know, try to do that. Now, beyond that, we got to start thinking about how do we go back to organizing our communities to serve in this particular function. And that does not necessarily start with thinking of everything through a kind of an arm lens. More or less, it really has to do with thinking everything through an information lens, gathering, sharing, distribution, you know, kind of lens. And the information to know, like, you know, hey, you know, some feds done came through, you need to be gone, right? You know, we got wind, this X, Y, and Z, you know, is moving. Maybe some folks don't need to be here, right? You know, that type level. And then we got to start getting back to, you know, thinking about how do we build, not only, you know, these fictitious sanctuary cities, you know, which is what we got now, to actually building sanctuary networks. If we really, so here's the thing, man, let me go back. If part of what is so disheartening, just to be real, is like if folks really thought fascism was coming, if you really, really thought fascism was coming, you'd be doing all this without me having to say a goddamn word. Because that means if you really think that that's what's coming, then you know the hammer is coming next. We haven't done no preparation like a hammer was coming. We just did been preparation like a basic kind of defending of rights. That ain't gonna cut it. Ain't nowhere where fascists have gotten in office have they ever been defeated at the voting block. That's not how this thing loses. That's not how it's defeated. So please take what I'm saying. You know, if you really think that this is going on, yeah, go get fortified and start talking to people in your community about, you know, what the steps are going to, you know, look like in order to, you know, marshal defense. You know, what are the communication networks? Because we can't be relying on cell phones. You know, study the global situation. Whatever you thought about the situation in Hong Kong, a lot of critical lessons the folks learned there about digital communications, what works, what doesn't work, right? Understanding at the end of the day, those instruments are in the hands of capital and the state. They can turn it off, turn it on when they want to. So we can't rely upon that. So what can we then rely upon, right? What type of human conveyance system of information, old school systems of information and conveyance can we employ, and we have to deploy in order to meet the situation, right? And make sure that you know, our folks are protected and survive and folks can move. So we're gonna have to start really thinking about and getting serious about, what it entails to build out sanctuaries, right? Build out these underground networks, that can move people, from here to there, safe place. And why am I saying that? Again, if you really think fascism is here, act like it, because they've already said they got lists. Trump didn't already come out and publicly say, I got a list, I'm adding on to my list, and soon as I get back in office, I'm coming for him, right? I'm gonna be your redeemer. He mean that shit. They mean that. He ain't the only one. And a good number of people, look, even what I mean, like, they don't need Trump to do this. The right keeps a tally of the left. They got websites and monitoring sites with half of our damn names on them, and some of this shit is actually pretty informative. I keep track of some of mine. I'm like, damn, I didn't have that document. Y'all got a PDF of this I don't even have, right? So some of this shit is pretty good in terms of monitoring. So we already on the list. Do we have a corresponding list of knowing who they are? No, we don't. Let's be real, right? Our game is not up to that level. We are adequately unorganized for this situation if we actually believe that's what's going on. And just thinking that endorsing her is going to be enough protection should she win or lose, like, no, we have to build another set of institutions and structures that are completely outside of their purview if we really think this is what's going down. I do. And I want to encourage you to, folks who are listening and watching, to take it seriously and start, if it's just a conversation with your immediate family, do that. If you got comrades enough that you could trust, enough, who take this, stuff seriously, start doing that, because this basic level of just immediate fortification, communication, knowing, do some scenario planning that, should the feds come, should the police come, should the militia come, how do I move? Where am I going to? Are folks going to be prepared to receive me? Will they have any, knowledge, of how to talk, how to move, what to convey, what not to convey? What's the next step? Do we have, cars, gas, resources, maps? Because you can't rely upon the digital infrastructure, but particularly if somebody from the government, as soon as you turn that phone on, they own you, right? They can triangulate you. So do you got maps, and do you got water? You got the medicines you need, the things that are necessary to, to move from point A to point B. Look, either we serious about this or we not at this point. And I think the first part I'm trying to get over is, like, look, we got to get over some elements of the mental blocks that we have. I find myself here recently being angry at myself about, like, bro, better, and I ain't got this ready, blah blah blah. But like, okay, and part of that just because of our general level of disorganization or lack of level of organization, some of that I had to rely upon, like, okay, get grounded, talk to folks who got some, who got some skill, presence, and being like, all right, help me see through a couple of different things. I want to make sure I got some, my blind spots are covered. Are you seeing it this way? What's the move here? And this is why the importance of being in an organization and being, in community is important, to offer kind of checks and balances and levels of support. So this next 60 days, if that's what it is, this level of this conversation, at this granular scale, I think everybody needs to start having, of just doing some basic planning around our own kind of immediate security, because that's fundamentally where we're at. But that can't just stay at the immediate. At some point, we're gonna have to actually, dialogue on a community level, organization, have forced these nonprofits to have some different types of conversations, that are all out there about utilizing resources in a different way, understanding that they're coming for these nonprofits. That's another thing that Trump didn't already shared. So thinking that you just being quiet under or not having certain kind of conversations, you don't necessarily need to have them publicly, but definitely start having some real conversations with your membership about, or your staff, if that's just what it is, about, how things, particularly need to move, and what is the plan for the day that they start sitting in summonses or worse, to shut our operations down, right? When they block the bank accounts, what's the backup plan? Right? How things are going to move? Is enough stored away in other accounts, or is there enough cash maybe somewhere in hand to then be able to treat on just the general market to make things move? So like the abstract scenario planning we were doing earlier about should Trump Harris win, people can take that with a grain of salt. Take this level of your immediate planning around however you view it and assess it, take that much more seriously, right? And starting engaging in that regardless of what your perspective is. Because at the end of the day, like I was saying, I hope people can agree, even if you just, trying to vote for Harris on the expedient level, because I know that's what the reading the North Star, piece, that's part of what they were kind of playing with. Okay, well, if that's what you're going to do, you at least got to then, recognize she ain't going to defend you. And not at this practical level should, her and her forces, they're not going to defend any of us when it comes to the level of violence that may erupt, from her victory, and them not accepting defeat or acceding to her victory, and the chaos that they've already said that they totally going to unleash. So you got to do a level of this planning, regardless if you think I'm just blowing smoke up your ass anyway. Take what they say, what they are saying, what they are putting out in commercials at this point, right, to raise money. Take them seriously.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think, as you've said other times too, it's like, at certain points you've said, like, if people think that I'm being alarmist, like, it will at least get you to the level of preparation, closer to the level of preparation and organization that you're going to need to get to at some point, no matter what, right? And so it's like it behooves us, especially this late in the game, where we are already well behind where we would need to be in terms of organization to get to jump into it as much as we can. One of the things that you've talked about in other conversations is this idea of kind of a 10-mile radius. Right. And I mean, that's very interesting, I think, because, like, I mean, I'm right outside of Philadelphia, but 10 miles takes me to 2 million people probably, right? But and a lot of different forces, right? But other places, they may be in a more rural or suburban area, and that's 10 miles might be a distance for a lot less folks and forces. But talk a little bit about the practical thing you're thinking about around a 10-mile radius. And then I guess one of the things that is, to go back to something that you said earlier, and thinking about, having these conversations with nonprofit forces and things like this, right? As we know, like, nonprofits typically have had kind of a, not kind of, but they have a clientelistic kind of relationship with, obviously, kind of liberal philanthropic capital, as well as often like local, city, county, sometimes state democratic forces, right, that help to ensure funding for their programs. And so that tends to lead to a kind of, again, this popular front strategy often with those folks. But obviously you're also talking about individuals within these spaces, right? So anyways, I'm just thinking about, again, trying to help people be practical too, as they're thinking about, like, I'm trying to figure out who am I gonna pull together and have conversations beyond, also, as you say, your family, your immediate family, close comrades and things like that. But as you're actually thinking practically about, like, okay, who might have some food, who might have some different resources, who might have some things that can help us as we think about this. Could you talk a little bit about that on the local aspect?
Right. Well, the 10-mile thing, just so, since you started there, that was trying to be as practical could be, right? And for folks who are wondering, what's the name of the piece that was in? I mean, there's if you could find it, I think Scrib has a version of a piece I did, almost 15 years ago, and let your motto be resistance, right? About self-organization and just some things there. So I would, point people to that, resource. It's free. So, you can go, if you can find it. I'll try to find a link to it and send it to you, Jared, to post maybe on something after this. But
I think I found it, so I can drop it
okay.
into the chat and the show description.
Yeah, and then the other piece is just some ideas. What was the name? I think let's look at my little notes here. Hold on. What was the name of that joint? It's some thoughts on what can be done to withstand the neo-Confederate, neo-fascist conquest of power. So that's what that specifically kind of 10-mile piece was. But it's trying to be practical as practical can be. What do I mean by that? Assume when times really get rough, what you can do walking, if you're able-bodied or you're in relationship with people who are able-bodied, what they can really do in the span of like a 24-hour day to get from point A back to point B, right? Within a day of kind of completing a circle. And the time and the hours it takes, was it typically like 30 minutes for a mile? So, you're talking about the outer limit of what it might be practical within like a 12-hour day to walk to someplace and walk back. And I'm stressing the walking, because it may come a time when you don't have access to gas, or you don't have access to a vehicle, or you don't want to have access to that, to ensure that the vehicle doesn't have some tracing mechanism on it. You don't discarded your phone and other things, to move X, Y, and Z. That is kind of the typical limit by which you can move within a rational amount of time, efficient amount of time to be able to kind of move goods or provide a service to different folks, or to, to maximize the distance, within what you can do under your own power. And the other option is, going back to an older form of technology, which is a bike, and thinking about, everybody needing to make an investment in those, to the extent that you can, and your physical ability will allow you to. And then think about what are the things that need to happen, again, thinking about all of those in our community. What about the children? What about the elderly? What about, those who have disabilities? What type of resources do we need if people can't walk? Well, do we have carriages? Do we have X, Y, and Z? Do we need to make an investment in that? Yes, you do. Like what are the different things that we need to do and figure out, on a collective level. This is why you need, that broader piece around the self-defense units and the people's assemblies of like, okay, where can this stuff be housed? How do we ensure, access to it? How do we ensure that it's being used, properly, and resources aren't just being, abstracted or hoarded, or just absconded to meet, kind of an individual need, without accountability, right? So that's what that piece is fundamentally about, and that's just drawn on, a little bit of personal experience, but also, just being a student of other folks in crisis situations. Unfortunately for me, I've had some experience, doing international human rights monitoring, in a couple of different countries, and like, okay, yeah, this is what people can do and what they have to do, living in a conflict situation. And if folks want to get a real concrete sense of how this is happening and playing out in different places in the real, I would encourage everybody to study what's going on with the emergency committees, the relief committees right now in the Sudan, how they are organizing, in the midst of this civil war, to still provide food, medicine, to folks in the middle of this crazy ass civil war that's going on, and how a good example, also living example of how these revolutionary neighborhood committees shifted when the need needed to require them to shift, to meet kind of a different function and purpose, but still laying a basis, I think anyway, for reorganization when conditions change and they're able to change the conditions. So going back to the earlier part of our conversation, I just thought I want to cite that So people just think we're not talking about abstract, shit that, it just came out of my head or somebody else. They're like, no, this is something that's real that people are doing in the real world right now, that you can look at, study, examine if you care to, and take the discipline and time to do that. And that's not the only place, and where you can kind of look up stuff like that. But that's a real one that I think bespeaks to, like, if things get bad, really, really, really bad, how folks going to move. Don't think, I'm citing this case because I think folks panic, as opposed to, like, no, this is reality. How folks, particularly in the third world, have been having to deal the last 50, 60 years of the so-called glorious period of stabilization in the world. So it can be done in necessity. If that's what requires, we're going to have to do it. So might as well study and learn from people who've had to go through that and are going through it now. So, but anyway, that's what that 10 mile piece was based upon, that. And like, these are the things that and the hope is that, view it as a circle. So, like, okay, we got our little, about the limitations. If we're doing it on like a federated level with folks that we trust, we cover this little 10, area, but we allow with other folks who cover in this little 10 area, and we can, exchange knowledge, information, resources, and marshal if we need to rally to each other's aid and defense. So that's what it was trying to be, a practical, and looking at it on. You first got to start with the level of what you can actually practice, in the immediate enforcers you got trust with, but you don't want to be isolated and just thinking like, bunker mentality. So the other piece you made me think about, none of what I'm articulating is a bunker mentality. People sometimes think it is, and like, oh, you sound like those white survivalists. Like, no, the big difference is I don't think I'm gonna survive on my own. I know I'm not. That's not how this is going to go down, right? And so just me having a 3 months, storage of food, that means, if I'm gonna have that mentality, I'm gonna have to shoot anybody who come to my door just to protect their 3 month set of food. And that also means that the folks who are hungry, they're gonna be coming to my door with a gun. That ain't gonna, to get what I got inside. That ain't gonna last too long, right? So we might as well figure out, all right, you got a need, I got a need. I want to live, you want to live. Let's talk about how we gonna make this happen, right? So I ain't got to hurt you, and you ain't got to hurt me. But we clear that there are some folks who do intend to hurt us both, and we need to unite in order to defend ourselves against them. So in that sense, just this kind of sense of a practical set of fronts is a requirement, right? And we need to be very real about that. But yeah, the four basic components, and you were asking me when we talked about the program earlier, an immediate program that I, talked about in this piece that's on Navigating the Storm, right? You can basically kind of just boil that down to, what a distilled, shorter, immediate sense of this kind of, the pieces I was talking about, that build and fight formula, that inverses a couple of things. The first one is self-defense. Then you're looking at mutual aid, right? Then you're looking at, trying to do some food security, work. And then you got to do a different modified form of people's assembly communication, that planning element. Like, that's going to be the more immediate thing. And I say that why you take some other stuff, if it's that kind of chaotic, the level of work of, getting up, going 9 to 5, clocking in, clocking out, that's probably going to be disruptive for many. The level of being able to go to, a community production center or factory to do everything, that's going to be also very limited under a time of, severe stress. But these type of things we know are going to have to continue. So, it's an extraction of, like, this is how you would deal with the immediate that would give you give us hopefully enough space to maneuver and survive, but then regroup and rebound so that we can get back to organizing for ourselves, on a broader productive level to meet what we need, kind of at a later point. So that's what that was kind of distilled, down to, and the piece around self-defense, really, you ultimately really, there's your personal space, immediate relationships that you want to do within that, but you ultimately got to think about this as community defense. Otherwise, it's not really going to be effective against the forces that we are fighting with. They outnumber us. They're better resourced than we are. They're armed to the teeth, and they have a proclivity for violence anyway. That's how this shit was built in the first place. So, we got to inverse that, and trying to build unity is the first step towards doing that based on our objective needs.
Appreciate that so much. I'm gonna thank a couple people, and then we have a little bit more time. So if people do have questions from the chat, we will take those, and I'm gonna pull up one I have here in a second. But Nader, I appreciate the comment on, this from the perspective of an Egyptian who witnessed all the changes after 2011. Deploying the military on the streets is its own can of worms. I think the United States would utterly demoralize people completely about the U.S. military. Yeah, I hear that. Francis, thank you so much for the contribution. For folks who don't know, Francis Madison has interviewed Kali a couple of times on, I think, The Real News, and those are great interviews as well. So shout out to Francis. So someone asked, could you go a little bit deeper on the relationship between white militias, the police, and the Republican Party? I'll just say quickly for this too, like Kali talked about this in the South, but I grew up in Southern Oregon, and in certain counties in Southern Oregon, there really weren't police, but what there were a whole lot of organized militia activity where often they were living on federal land essentially, or sometimes state land. And the relationship was such that the state wasn't going to go in there and fuck with them because they were. So anyways, I just offer that because it is, it's true in the South. It's also very true in the West. Especially
Idaho and the Great Redoubt, that whole area up there, that's basically its own little republic right now. Straight up.
Exactly. Yeah. So go ahead, talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, this, this piece around the militias, that's countenance from place to place, region to region. If you want, I would say like generalize, in the South, or in Ohio. Okay. Yeah. So Ohio, I already know, has some set up similar, parts of Ohio has some set up similar to what Jared was just talking about in Oregon. Right. And that's becoming a much more commonplace kind of phenomenon. But like in a place like in say like in Mississippi, there's not much of, at this juncture of the road, because of the solid ideological capture of the Republican Party, by this kind of neo-fascist, neo-Confederate ideology. The folks who were forming militias in the 80s are now the sheriff, straight up. Same people. So they organize, in this case, in large parts, at least around the South, and I think parts of the Midwest, some of those same forces organized to just infiltrate the existing institutions, that existed. And the places, like I think why this is more concentrated in this way, say like in the Deep South, because those are like much more older, settled places where the state already had set up established institutions of white supremacy, the citizens councils, all those different things that existed. Whereas, like in parts of the Midwest, above the Mason-Dixon line into, further to the west, it's profoundly different. And there you find more of these kind of militia sets up, who both operate in some places in relationship to like the county sheriffs, but also sometimes out and aggressively out, right? And what you see in a place like Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, studying some of those places, you have local sheriffs and local militias who work in tandem with each other, sharing, politics and worldview, but are no longer aligned with the federal government. And this has been a deep and profound shift in the forces of white supremacy over the last 50 years. Where the federal government has been viewed as an enemy because they view the federal government as being captured fundamentally by Black folks and immigrants, and is no longer a bastion that they control or represents solely the interests of white people. And so it's become an enemy, or at least something that has to be guarded and controlled, or guard, consciousness against or weary of. But that's different, I would say, in place to place, because some of the federal, like I know out in some of the Western states, some of the federal agencies have been captured by some of these same forces, and where they have captured, at least controlling that little office, and who sits in these offices, at the Federal Reserve. I mean, at the the Federal Lands Bureau, where they know they got somebody on the inside. There's less of a need to rely upon the militias. Don't mean that they don't have them, but there's less a need to rely upon them. And in many cases, like in Mississippi, what they would then do is like, okay, we don't need a necessary militia because the sheriff can deputize us and give us legal cover to do what we want to do. And that's been happening the last 10 years at an accelerated pace, throughout the South, Midwest, and in parts of the West that people have not been paid attention to. But I would say, to answer your question, this is like right now, it's still a county by county fight. It's not completely uniform. And so where there are some level of progressive forces, or there are a level like, where some of this, for instance, to make it, even more practical and concrete, to understand the material differences, like where there are farmers that are like highly dependent upon USDA and in the federal government, there may be some ire and angst about, certain degree how they're going to be treated and be treated unfairly that might move them further to the right. But they're not going, at this point, most of them are not going, to cut off their foot, and so you'll find there's still places like out in the West where some farmers and ranchers will still be at odds with some of these militias because the militias threaten their bread and butter, right? Of like, y'all can't be here, you can't do X, Y, and Z, because that's going to get me in trouble with the feds. And if I don't get, this grant or this subsidy coming in, then I'm not going to make it. So y'all are threatening my livelihood. So it's not like, the commitment is also a material piece that we need to understand why it's not completely uniform. And then this is a place where we need to like learn, if we're going to, learn like what this nuance is, so we can figure out how to split and divide these forces, right? And so this brings it back to like, to me, now mind you, China is a state, but I always bring it up in some things that I teach. There's a map that I always pull out from the New York Times. I still have it up on my computer right now. There's a map that they put out. It got wide put out, but when Trump hit China with some sanctions, China took a week and came back with some sanctions of their own. And what I want to draw people to is the precision that they came back with their sanctions. They said, "No, we're not going to sanction everybody. We are targeting corporations, farmers, and other, business entities in the counties that you won. So we just gonna hurt your base, your people." Think of the level of knowledge that they have about the U.S. economy to be able, within a week's time, come back with a counter sanctions regime that only target those particular corporations. We live here. We don't have that level of knowledge, let alone a program to be able to execute any reprisals upon anybody. So this just speaks to, I always thought like this is what serious looks like. Compare what they're doing to what we're doing, right? If you want to understand the level of organization we need to get at, regardless of what you think of, China and the Communist Party, just think about the actual application of applied knowledge and what it can be done with. Like that's the level of what we have to get at. So going back to your question, we got to understand it's different, slightly different. There's a general trend, no question. But not all of them are the same. We got to figure out, all right, this is going to be straight up enemy territory. I definitely don't want to be moving through that county. But this county, there may be some folks here that we can countenance who are not with this program, and why, and how do I need to go approach somebody, who probably ain't seen, particularly in the West, ain't seen a black face in a minute. What do I need? How am I go, talk to them about why we should be in unity with each other? They ain't gonna be around nothing ideological. It's gonna be around like, okay, I'm here to protect your interests in the short term as this farmer doing X, Y, and Z. We're gonna lie so that you can, keep getting these resources. But we need information. We need to know, blah blah blah. Whatever the situation may be. But we got to break it down that in that degree. But best believe, understand relative to your question, to end it up and surmise it. This is, this piece of the militias starting out to capture these offices has been a direct and applied strategy that folks have been employing basically since Waco. A series of them have taken it very serious, and they've made some significant headway in the last 30 years in doing that, in parts of the Midwest, the South, and the West.
Yeah, absolutely. So somebody who wanted to remain anonymous, but they asked a question, what should Black youth students do to prepare at Black colleges and institutions for attacks despite either candidate winning?
Whew. That's a hard one. And let me say why. Most of those Black HBU administrations suppress activism pretty tough, right?
Yeah, I have a friend who's a professor at Howard, and he's like, they don't allow anything.
HBCUs, you talking about undemocratic spaces, and I'm not defending them, but part of why they got that way was because of like what happened at Jackson State, the shootout that happened there, of folks protesting, the Vietnam War, and they came and killed folks. It wasn't just Kent State, so folks understand your history. And that was going on through HBCUs all throughout the country, and the HBCUs played a pivotal role in forming the African Liberation Support Committee, which was given political and material aid, particularly the forces in Guinea-Bissau, Angola, Mozambique, right, in particular, in that area in the 70s, Zimbabwe as well. And they don't want to be, sanctioned or caught by the United States, government for providing any kind of material aid to anything radical or could be deemed terrorist. So they come down, with the iron fist on folks. So any organizing on that level basically needs to happen without the sanction. I would say you got to start without the sanction of the university. And that often means you're gonna have to find some community organizations and community spaces to do it in, so they can't shut the meeting down or regulate what's going on. So you're gonna have to have a solid relationship with other forces adjacent to you in your community to be able to at least just have the organizing space and the maneuverability, right, to be able to pull some things together. But I have seen some of the little chat groups and stuff that I'm, have time to monitor. Just so folks know, I think where the question is coming from, there are some stated attacks that folks have been talking about on some of these right wings aimed at HBCUs. And what was it, earlier in 2023, there was a couple of incidents where some white supremacist forces came to a couple of HBCUs and did some targeting. And that's just what I know. I'm sure there's a lot more that I haven't heard of, because shit is popping off everywhere, and it's just not reported, and it's intentionally not being reported, either by the universities and institutions themselves, and definitely not by, mainstream media, as in part, you can kind of clearly see, they're trying to keep a certain practical panic down, but then trying to scare the shit out of people on the other hand. So like, that's what the clearest example of that is, how MSNBC and CNN, about 3 months ago discovered Project 2025. and they do a show on Project 2025, both of them, every single day now for like going on like a damn near what, by at least 60 days, and this it's going to do this, and there's this little paragraph, this, blah blah blah. Like that's a coordinated plan of if you want to understand how the bourgeoisie work, just study the media and how on that case. So but I'm just saying on the verse, there's been a rising number of threats. Like for instance, they're not reporting all the students they done attacked, and put in prison or got cases around the Palestine, for instance, right? So like they're making deliberate choices on what to prop up and what to suppress. And so this piece around how HBCUs in particular and other institutions are getting targeted by white supremacy, that's one of these pieces they suppress. But I would say just in the short term, folks need to find space with other community organizations, particularly if you can, you listen to this, find some radical organizations that you can, work with. If they got some politics you can get down with, join them. If not, work adjacent to them, and just keep principal relationships with folks that you can build on, for years and hopefully come up with a new synthesis down the road. But that's what I would recommend on that level.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's great. Somebody asked for, well, actually, before I get to that, because we'll do that as a closing question, but do you, like the DHS, right? And I'm thinking about the, the thing that always gets referenced of like the 100 miles, from any border, right? Which like takes it to like, I don't know, 90% of the population or something like that.
Right.
I mean, it's both of the, as you said already, I mean, probably the only distinction between Trump and Harris on this at this point around border policy, right, is basically that Trump is more openly saying, I'm going to deport people, as opposed to Harris is now, we're going to hire more border patrol, harden the border, build the wall, like all the kind of.
I would push back on that, Jared. I don't think that's the main difference in distinction there. I think the main distinction, there that Harris is saying they will deport, and they will detain. They've adopted that. The last piece of that I checked, I would say the main qualitative difference is that Trump's program means that if me or you harbor a migrant, we go to jail.
Okay. Right. Well, I appreciate the distinction. I mean, the main question I was going there actually wasn't so much about the distinction, but I do appreciate you pointing that out. But is this, which we saw to some degree during the George Floyd protests, where Trump was deploying, as I understand, you can correct me on this too if I'm wrong, but DHS, like in Portland, for instance, to scoop up people who were organizing, amid the George Floyd rebellions, right, in DHS vans, and then do interrogations and stuff like that, along with other federal forces and agencies. And so, I don't know my question there, but I guess it's more do you see this as another level of how things, what people need to be prepared for, I guess?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But again, look, it's not quite clear where the repressive apparatus is completely going to break, right? And if we have more time, what we did was a short scenario play out, right? But I think if we really serious, we got to examine this almost to a degree between institutions, particularly at the federal government, because there's different alignments that you can now clearly kind of see. And what do I mean by this? So, go back and look at the I wasn't about to say trial, the investigative report piece that the Democrats did on January 6th, that Benny Thompson led. The Secret Service would not surrender text message information to the federal government around, their activities, relative to defending President Trump on that day. And then they came up with some public excuse. We lost that information. Y'all destroyed it. You hit it. You ain't load shit. Like NSA got all my shit, so I know they got y'all shit, right? So that was again one of these kind of clear moves that there's some divided interests, and that at least that faction was going to both defend itself, but also defend Trump, and that they were aligned with Trump. And there's been some other things that's been clearly, kind of an alignment around different factions of folks of these departments, at least their department heads. And I would argue some of the base, particularly amongst, the repressive apparatus, their own unions and organizing bases, which they have, they've already had some declared alignment. So, like DHS has clearly kind of indicated, for instance, going back to that one, they're pro-Trump, right? Secret Service, pro-Trump. Most of your police forces and sheriff forces, pro-Trump. So, it's like the domestic apparatus, I think he has more forces organized and prepared to rally with him and his cause. Now, it's the forces that are more externally facing, at least in their declared mission. So it's the Pentagon, which I think is much more democratically aligned. But to what degree is not particularly clear. Right, because it's one thing to have the brass that's sitting in the chairs, be with you. It's another thing to have the lieutenants and the sergeants be on the other side, because those are who are in direct communication, with the troops. And if they can marshal enough troops, we've seen plenty of coups in history where it's the junior officers who wind up taking control, not the generals, right? Because the generals are to compromise. They pup, some of the stuff that's going on right now. Again, I always try to draw things in that not either living memory or that are going on now. So if you look at part of what's going on in Sahel, in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, some of those are junior officers who toppled some of the senior ranks because the senior ranks were clearly in the pockets of either France and or the United States or NATO. And it was just like, nah, we're not dealing with this Comprador bullshit no more. Y'all got to go, right? And so play out a scenario in your head, at least give it space to say, just because the top brass may be allied with Biden and don't mean that everybody below is with their program. And, that's an institution which is tight-knit enough that it's hard to get information about, the Pentagon puts out some of the best reports out there, just if folks ever want to read it. Some of the best climate change stuff, for instance, about which the force, I would argue, that's taking climate change within the existing federal government, the most serious is the Army, per their own reports of them declaring water wars are coming. They very clear, like, hey, we know, all this corporate shit is one thing. We are actually following the science and following the developments, and this is where it's going to lead. So, but anyway, we need to do an examination of all these different forces to how to have some sense of how they may break, because they're not all aligned, right? And it's going to be, it, at the end of the day, though, again, I might treat with an army, a black army or black or Latino army officer, should they set up a roadblock on the street, I might have a little bit more, comfort with them and appeal to them than a local police, a local Jackson police officer or, sheriff, whatever the situation is. But at the end of the day, they both my enemy. I'm not going to play it like a fool, and they can put a bullet in my head at a whim's end if I'm in that situation or you in that situation. So it's a matter of seconds that you can maybe read a situation, determine how you want to act. But that's all you got at the end of the day, because again, we're not organized to a level to intervene on these forces. We need to be real about that. And so we really kind of, on a certain level, the prognosis is, being a spectator to just understand, who am I running from, right? And where might I be able to run to, to find some community to be able to deal with to fight for a long, survive and fight another day. We got to get to a level of organization where we can try to actually intervene, but we're not there now.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. So I know you got to go in a minute. As you're leaving, wrapping up, somebody asked for a reading list, and I think maybe just, you know, as people are thinking about the things you're laying out in this conversation, obviously the main thing that you're suggesting is that people act and that they organize, right? But as we're doing that too, we may want to read things with people that we're organizing with or whatever to help us also, you know, even in our conversations around scenario planning or whatever else. And so are there any books that come to mind that you would suggest?
Look behind Jared. There's a soldier story. I would start part there about the types of things that are what Kawasi and folks had to do in order, to be able to move, have safe houses, etc. Look at that, take it serious. You kind of got to read between the lines and read some other works, I think, to understand, some of that. For, I think, a solid grounding around a deep understanding of fascism. He has a book behind him called Blood in My Eye that's right behind him. Give that a good read. I think, that there's some clear, solid warnings about fascism in that, and Soledad Brother, which are definitely worth bringing forth as a bedrock to any serious analysis around the current situation and how it developed and how we got to this point, and the ideological foundations of the confusion, which keep, getting people ensnared in these kind of popular front points. Our piece, for building fight, as a start. I would definitely encourage, like, at least for this conversation, the shifting focus article. It's long overdue for part 2, which was promised to come out. It hasn't come out because just things have been shifting so much since we wrote that. That I think we were still basically on point, more right than wrong, but there were definitely some things that we got wrong or didn't take enough consideration or have enough knowledge about the actual situation, in particular in other parts of the global South. And there's still things that we need to, like, read and assess. So, like I was just talking about, the situation in the new Saharan Confederacy. To me, it's still too early. I'm still in the phase. I'm not going to speak against it, but it's not always clear that the military regimes are what they say that they are. And how much space is actually being given to the popular movements and the people's organizations within those spaces, to organize a broad democratic transformation and revolution. So they might speak Sankar's language, but that don't mean they executing Sankar's program. So that has to be kind of viewed and studied. But what I'll do, is come up with I'll try to send Jared within like the next couple of hours, because I got to go tend to some family stuff. A little reading stuff that's both historic and concurrent. That I think might support some ongoing organizing stuff. Some of the stuff I would also put out there. It's got some controversy to it, particularly in a moment right now. But some of the stuff that's come out of Roosevelt the last couple of years is worth reading. You might not agree with all of their political alignments, particularly relative to Israel, but read it in terms of, in the context of the Civil War that they've kind of operate on the international, dimension of that, between, being cross purposes with different imperial interests, between what, the Erdogan and his regime are doing, what Assad is doing, what the U.S. ultimately is doing, and how they have to treat with each other, and the difference between, what Erdogan want, which is the extinction of the Kurds, basically, and what the United States wanted in terms of a buffer force, to contain ISIS, even though that's a force that they created, to kind of play those games. It's an interesting read and a lot of lessons to be drawn from that. I think, and I countenance them and just say that it's not by chance. And this is getting to maybe a deep point about the dialectic, right? How things move and develop. It's not by chance, I would argue, that our program in Jackson sounds very similar to the program that they've been developing in Roosevelt, right? Because we've both been trying to maneuver, I would argue, just understanding the historical law. We've both been trying to maneuver in a set of limited spaces and contradictions, where the organization has been, their organization is, they come out of a party, on a far more profound level than we do, but still operating within a limited space and trying to figure out, this is where people are at. These is kind of what the situation requires, and these are some of the forms, that might fit this particular time and need to get us from point A to point B. So if you want a continent to a deeper kind of reason around like the build and fight formula kind of piece, check that out. And then, also check out how I would argue both of us, directly and indirectly, have also building on some earlier movements from the 90s, building on what the Zapatistas were trying to do at a little earlier period. So reading list coming, read, study, apply.
I know you have to run. I want to let you go. I genuinely appreciate it. I hope we can do it again sooner rather than later and kind of continue this conversation, deepen it, especially if people have more questions that they want us to dig into. Thank you so much, Kali Akuno.
Appreciate it.